All right. Thank you all for coming. There's coffee on the left, bathrooms are on the right, down the hallway. I make that joke on every webinar since the pandemic started, and I hope it always makes at least someone laugh. So thank you all for joining us. So we're going to get started now. And thank you all for coming to a very exciting webinar. This is the first webinar in a 6-part social justice and equity series on, this one is on cannabis legislation and social justice. So my name is Alex Ambrose. I am currently a policy analyst at New Jersey Policy Perspective, but I'm also here because I am a former policy assistant at New Jersey LCV. Look back on those days fondly. So I will be your guest moderator for tonight's webinar. Just a quick few Zoom tips. So please stay muted during the webinar. Please change your name as well so we know who you are, and feel free to put in the chat where you're calling in from today. We always love to hear where folks are calling in from. There will be time at the end for questions, so please put your questions in the chat. Our staff will be collecting them, and we will get to them at the end after our presentation. So, oh, and this webinar is being recorded, so it will be available afterwards as well. And just a heads up to everyone one more time, this webinar is available in both Spanish and English. So if you are interested, you can click that globe on the bottom and you can choose either the Spanish or the English channel. Thank you all. And you will also hear some pauses as we allow our interpreter to catch up. So we're going to go ahead and start diving in. Some of you may be wondering why an environmental organization such as New Jersey LCV is hosting a webinar on this topic. So before we actually dive in to talk to our experts, I wanted to give some context to New Jersey LCV's involvement in the work and how it ties into the environment and environmental justice. So some of our closest partners who represent environmental justice communities have explained that while we are discussing environmental justice and how it impacts, especially Black and Brown communities, white-led organizations such as New Jersey LCV want to recognize that clean water and open space are not necessarily at the top of the mind for a lot of people of color, because Black and Brown communities and low-income communities are more likely to suffer from a number of other pressing issues like criminalization, the stigma of legalized marijuana and cannabis, a criminal justice system that harms and imprisons Black and Brown people at much higher rates, and they experience greater frequencies of health problems, such as our incredibly high asthma rates here in New Jersey and complications from an inequitable healthcare system. So while that's just the tip of the iceberg, it begs the question, how can organizations such as New Jersey LCV expect these communities to give time and energy to chronic issues such as environmental pollution when they are facing other severe life-threatening challenges? Second, New Jersey LCV and allies believe that the environmental movement has missed opportunities to build bold and sweeping policy change because we've built too narrow a movement. So we viewed environmental issues too narrowly, missing opportunities for collaboration with a lot of groups to build more power on intersectional issues such as public health, such as economic justice, and more. So now we know that this has prevented us from building the large-scale, multiracial, and cross-class movement for change that we need in order to ensure a just transition of our economy and other systems into the 21st century. Black and Brown-led organizations and individuals have known this for years, and we are trying to listen and take action. So, why are we kicking off this series with a webinar about cannabis? Cannabis, like any other plant, requires resources like land and water. It is a burgeoning and exciting industry, and while it is an important job and economic opportunity for the state, it also poses environmental challenges that could exacerbate competition for land and water, especially if the resources are misused and polluted, which happens so often in our state. Another issue that affects this is something like warehouse expansion. That's a hot topic, and even the environmental impacts of indoor growth of cannabis must be considered. So cannabis is now a part of our agricultural sector here in the Garden State, and we must adapt to it. And that is not to say that it doesn't provide benefits, because cannabis has been shown to improve outcomes for cancer patients, reduce chronic pain, and improve mental health, amongst many other positive health outcomes. And as a medical cannabis patient myself, I solidly agree with that argument. In addition, the cannabis industry presents an extraordinary economic opportunity for our state. And as a budget nerd, this is where I get excited as well. Across this country, states have collected almost $4 billion in recreational cannabis tax revenue in 2021 alone. So if we make sure that Black and Brown communities benefit from the opportunity to build wealth for long-term financial stability in the cannabis industry, we can help ensure that people have the ability to invest time and energy on other pressing issues, like our environment, like democracy, while we all work together to address the historic injustices and cannabis discrimination that these communities faced. So with that, we're about to dive in, and I will soon introduce our experts. But for now, we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for supporting and uplifting this webinar. So our co-sponsors are the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, as many of you know them, of New Jersey, the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, Latino Action Network Foundation, Newark Science and Sustainability, Trust for Public Lands, New Jersey Highlands Coalition, and the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. We also want to give a special thank you to Marcus Sibley. He's the president of the Southern Burlington NAACP chapter and chair of New Jersey Progressive Energy Equity Coalition, or PEAC, and Maria Santiago Valentin, co-founder, trustee, board secretary, and director of NJ Affairs of the Atlantic Climate Justice Alliance. Without these partners, this webinar series would not have been possible. So thank you. And now for the main event, I am so excited to introduce our two speakers. So our first speaker is Ami Kachalia, campaign strategist at ACLU, New Jersey, where she develops and leads policy advocacy campaigns with a focus on drug policy, criminal legal reform, and immigrants' rights. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Rutgers University, New Brunswick. Go RU. Outside of work, Ami also serves as board chair of the New Jersey Harm Reduction Coalition. Our second speaker, Leo Bridgewater, was born and raised in Trenton. In 2001, Leo enlisted in the United States Army and spent 5 years as a telecommunications specialist with multiple deployments to Iraq. Leo separated from the Army in 2006 and spent 2.5 years working for the Department of the Army at the Pentagon as a Department of Defense contractor, serving in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Having personally experienced 3 battle buddies attempt suicide and 2 being successful, and knowing there are 22 veteran suicides per day, Leo began advocating to add post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, to the New Jersey Medical Marijuana Program. Leo is an advisory board member for Cannabis World Conference Business Expo and National Director for Veterans Outreach with Minorities for Medical Marijuana. Leo is co-founder of CannaGather at New Jersey, partner of Heart Community Capital, co-owner of Collective 60, and co-host of the Smoke and Heroes podcast. Leo hopes to be a vessel by which the industry works through in the state of New Jersey. Leo is married to Dr. LaShonda Bridgewater and has 2 children. So welcome to our honored speakers, and I am now excited to give the floor to our first speaker, Ami. Ami, take it away.
Thanks, Alex, and hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm really excited to join you all for this important conversation around cannabis, legalization, decriminalization law here in New Jersey. So before we get started on what this really looks like for New Jersey, I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about the history of the war on drugs itself. And so in the United States, we have had policies related to drugs that go back to the late 1800s, and they've always been created specifically as a tool to target Black and Brown communities. Some of the first laws that we had in this country around drugs were to target Mexican American workers who are working in farms. Some of the first laws were targeting Chinese people who came over and were actually anti-opium laws. And then, of course, there were the marijuana laws that were created to to target as well. Now, when we talk about the war on drugs these days, we're typically talking about what we call the modern day war on drugs, which was started in 1971. And like the laws that came before it, there's a lot of history, a lot of documents that point to the fact that this war on drugs was created specifically as a tool to target civil rights activists in the 60s and in the 70s, and that it was also created to target anti-war protesters. And so it was really a tool for the government to uh, make sure that some people were being criminalized, that some people were being treated differently and unfairly under the law. And what it has led to is some of the most extreme racial disparities that we can think of all across our criminal legal system. So when we look at the data, actually, back in 1980, there were about 20,000 people who were incarcerated in state prisons for drug-related offenses. And that almost 30 years later, in 2008, that number grew to 250,000 people every year. And so we have seen a massive growth in what this looks like, and it is directly as a result of these policies that were created specifically to target Black and Brown people. We also know that there are huge racial disparities there, and that they have spurred investments in policing, in our prison system, and even in militarization. So sometimes people will see local police departments purchasing things like tanks, and that's actually through a program that was created from the war on drugs. And so the war on drugs goes far beyond just these simple policies, but also has changed the fundamental way in which policing happens as well. And then the last thing I just want to say about this is that while the country was investing in the war on drugs, investing in locking people up and separating people from their families and harming communities, they also were doing one more thing, which is that they were foregoing investments in the things that actually help people, right? So while they were investing in policing, they weren't investing in healthcare or in parks or in public health or in education. And so this is the result we have now, is the result of more than 50 years of policy choices that we have made, where we've really prioritized criminalizing people for drugs, as opposed to supporting communities. Next slide. Okay, so what does that look like here in New Jersey? So this is the most recent data that we have in terms of reports that break down racial disparities. But based on 2016 data, you can see that in New Jersey, Black people were 3.45 times more likely to be arrested for a marijuana-related charge than a white person. And this is despite similar rates of use. In some parts of the state, those disparities were much worse. And so in Hunterdon County, that disparity was 11 times higher. In Ocean County, it was 7 times. In Salem, it was 6 times. And you'll see throughout the state that there's extreme racial disparities that exist when it comes to how different communities are treated when it comes to drugs. And so for us at the ACLU of New Jersey, work on drug policy has always been around racial justice and making sure that we're beginning to divest from a system that does a tremendous amount of harm to people around the state. Now, it's important to note too that these racial disparities have actually gotten worse over time. And so the data you're looking at from 2016 that shows that racial disparities were almost 3.5 times higher. If you looked at similar data from 2013, it was 3 times higher. And so even though marijuana has become something that is more mainstream over the last few decades, we've also seen that policing for it, that the harm caused by it, and specifically the racial injustice caused by it, has gotten much worse. And so this really led to us and to partners around the state working on changing what our laws look like, and specifically working on marijuana decriminalization and working on marijuana legalization. Next slide. So Leo's going to talk a little bit later about legalization itself. And so I'm going to focus my part really on decriminalization and some of the other pieces that I think are really promising that came out of the changes that we made in law here in New Jersey. Now, the first is decriminalization. And decriminalization is very simply the process of removing criminal penalties that are associated with a specific action. And so what we did here in New Jersey is that we decriminalized marijuana up to a certain amount. So in our state, we've decriminalized marijuana up to 6 ounces, which means that someone can have it in their possession at that amount without getting a criminal penalty or a civil penalty. And just as a note, a civil penalty is something like a fine or some other consequence. And what we've also done is we've made sure that it's no longer a crime to have the kind of paraphernalia that people might have with them if they are using marijuana or cannabis. So rolling papers and the like can't get someone criminalized either when they're associated with marijuana use or with cannabis use. Now, it's really important to know that decriminalization is really what gets at making sure that people are no longer getting arrested. And when we look at our laws, the fact that we legalized and decriminalized at the same time isn't what always happens in states. Some states actually make a decision to decriminalize first and then go to legalization. Some of the states decriminalized as far back as 20 or 30 years ago. New Jersey has always been quite behind in this area. And so as a result, we actually had to decriminalize and legalize at the same time. And that's what we did in law a few years ago. Next slide. In addition to decriminalizing, something we did here in New Jersey is also to make sure that we are changing the ways in which drugs are used when it comes to interaction with law enforcement or police. So people may be familiar with the fact that marijuana, the pretext of having marijuana, you may have seen times where someone says, the police officer pulled me over. They told me they smelled marijuana, then they searched my car. Then it led to this other consequence. And this happened alarmingly often under law. This was used as a tool essentially to further criminalize people and specifically to further criminalize Black and Brown New Jerseyans. And so one thing we also made sure when we did decriminalization is not just decriminalize the possession of the substance itself, but also try to entangle the ways in which the possession of this drug gets used to further harm people. And so, for example, here in New Jersey, you can't use that anymore as an excuse to further search someone. And we also want to make sure that people can't get arrested for simply possessing the substance, for possessing the paraphernalia. And then there's also some changes that happened around distribution, essentially like a first-time warning system, so that people weren't getting charged immediately with a fourth-degree crime. These are all really important and they lay the groundwork for what we need to do overall when it comes to how we treat drugs in our system. And so marijuana is really just a starting point. Next slide. One of the most important parts of this reform was also trying to be more reparative in nature, right? We can never fix the harm that has been done to communities around the state, to all of the people who have found themselves criminalized as a result of marijuana laws. But what we did make sure we did is dismiss any pending cases that existed around possession. We put in place the tools to expunge over 350,000 records related to marijuana, and this is still, in process. And then there's also resentencing provisions in place so that if someone is incarcerated right now as a result of one of these crimes that are really no longer crimes under the law, that they will get their sentence looked at again to make sure that people aren't being incarcerated for marijuana alone. Next slide. And then finally, a quick note, we also put in anti-discrimination laws so that employers, people who are lending in the mortgage area and housing can't discriminate against people who have prior records for cannabis or for marijuana possession, just to make sure that there aren't continuing to be harms. To be in full disclosure, right, when we talk about criminalization and the war on drugs, there's the arrest and the conviction itself that harms people, right? But it's not just that. It's the fact that they're missing hours at work or at school. It's the impact of maybe losing your job. It's the impact of being away from family. And it also has other consequences that come with a record, right? So it might be hard to get housing. It might be hard to access financial aid for college, or it'll impact your immigration status. There's a lot of other issues that come up as a result of an arrest or conviction. And so part of the work of unraveling this is also to address this issue. Next slide. And then I just want to talk really quickly about one thing that's super important that's actually happening now that I hope people on the call will get involved in. A big part of marijuana legalization was also reinvesting in communities. Like I said earlier, as the state was investing billions of dollars into drug war enforcement, and I say billions because actually over the last 10 years, the state has spent almost $11 billion on enforcing the drug war, and that's from a New Jersey policy perspective report where Alex works. As the state has spent that money, it's really disinvested in other resources. And so a big part of legalization has also been to make sure that money the state now gets from cannabis goes back to the communities most harmed. And this happens through the budget process every single year. And here in New Jersey, almost 60% of all the sales tax revenue from marijuana, as well as 100% of the revenue that's garnered through another fee, all are promised for community reinvestment. But the budget process is opaque. And so if we actually want to make sure that money reaches the communities that deserve it, we have to make sure we're holding them accountable and that there's transparency. And so if this is something you're interested in being more involved in, I really encourage you to reach out to your lawmakers and to push them and tell them that you really want to see this money invested in the communities that have been harmed the most. And importantly, that you want them to listen to the voices of the people who've borne the brunt of this harm for decades and decades and decades. Next slide. And then finally, I'm just going to touch on this really quickly because I know Leo is going to speak to it too, but another pillar of our work at the ACLU is also to build an equitable industry. And so this is really making sure that the people who've been harmed the most have a fair shot of entering into this industry. And so I just wanted to say, as a state, we're making some progress in that area in terms of trying to prioritize people with prior marijuana related records or minority women and disabled veterans. But there's also a lot more that the state can do in this area. And one thing that we know is really important is providing people with access to the money they need to actually start their business. And so that's an area where we're pushing the state because we want to make sure that as these new opportunities open up, the people who most deserve to have access to the industry because they've been harmed the most aren't left behind. I think I'm at time, but I'm happy to take any questions later in the Q&A, and I'm going to turn it back to Alex.
Thank you so much, Ami, for your presentation. And now we are going to switch over to our good friend and second presenter, Leo Bridgewater. Leo, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Leo Bridgewater, National Director of Outreach with Minorities for Medical Marijuana, a bunch of things, and I'm a vessel. One of the things I just wanted to make note of was, it's crazy, I'm wearing that same T-shirt that was in the thing. That picture was taken years ago. So a brief, I call it drunken history of cannabis legalization in New Jersey and how it all went down. So in January of 2010, matter of fact, it was January 18th, 2010, Governor Corzine, right before he left office, he signed a whole bunch of bills. One of them was the Compassionate Use Medical Marijuana Act. And that was the birth of the cannabis industry as we know it in New Jersey. We started off as a medical marijuana state first, and just recently legalized for adult use back in November of 2020. And so before then, we spent that first 8 years, so from 2010 to 2017, Governor Chris Christie was the governor of New Jersey. And everyone who's familiar with Governor Chris Christie, he hated cannabis. And so it was the growth of the industry in New Jersey at that time. For a long period of time, we only had 6 operating dispensaries. And actually they were a full vertical model. And the full vertical model means that they had cultivation, processing, and dispensing. They had the whole thing from seed to sale. And we only had 6. And so the medical marijuana program at one point only had like one ID card maker. When I enrolled in 2015, I believe there were only 7,000 medical marijuana card holders in the state. And today, I believe we're knocking over 150,000. And so, and the biggest growth came during the current governor's administration, Phil Murphy. When I testified in Senate committee to have PTSD added as a qualifying condition, it was the first mental health condition to be allowed. And Governor Chris Christie did sign that bill into law. And then when Governor Phil Murphy came into office, he actually expanded the medical marijuana program to allow for 17 more conditions, and also opened up a process by which we could obtain your actual medical marijuana dispensary license. When that happened, that is how the industry really started to grow. But realize we're only in year 6 of the recovery of 8 years of Chris Christie. And so myself and a number of other advocates spent these years, advocating for the expansion of the medical marijuana program, and also for the legalization for adult use, of which Governor Phil Murphy wanted to get it done in the first 100 days of his administration, and it literally took him 4 years. So in November 2020, the state of New Jersey broke the record through ballot referendum with 67% of the vote saying yes to adult use. Governor Phil Murphy signed the adult use bill into law on February 23rd. That's today, as a matter of fact. Yeah, today. Today is the birthday. Wow. And so now we're 1 year from Governor Murphy having signed it. No, 2 years from Governor Murphy having signed this bill. And where are we today? Well, today, New Jersey is ground zero for the next evolution of the cannabis industry. When you look at what we have in the beginning of this industry from an adult use side, we have a cannabis regulatory authority, which is headed by Diana Waynu. We also have 4 other commissioners who all look like the general population of the state. And so we also have 30% of all licenses shall go to minorities, women, and veterans, and now formerly incarcerated as well. Today, that even though we're mandated by statute, I believe we're close to 50% of licensing having gone to those groups, those specific groups. The reason why I'm highlighting that is because traditionally or historically, Black and brown people make up less than 4% of participation in this industry nationwide. And so for New Jersey to have these numbers coming out and having these things happen, it's remarkable. In fact, New Jersey is the first state to be able to offer technical assistance in the form of access to education, and then also in the form and access to capital in the form of grants for legacy folks. And what I mean by legacy is the folks who were the guys on the corners who were selling cannabis. Now they can go and apply for a license and actually get help from the state, since they help build the market. We also have automatic record expungement, up to 5 pounds, to go along with the decriminalization, as Ami spoke to earlier. We also have job protections if you are a medical marijuana card holder in the state of New Jersey. So that means that if you test positive for cannabis, if you're tested by your job and you test positive for cannabis, you cannot be fired, unless it depends on the job. If you're a train conductor or operator or something, or operating cranes and stuff like that, no. If it is also illegal for you to be offered a job and then have it rescinded because of a positive test result for cannabis if you're a medical marijuana card holder in New Jersey. We also federally, just a week ago, the VA cannabis research bill passed through the House and is now headed into the Senate for a vote to possibly go before the president to be signed into law. We're giving the VA the ability to do research on cannabis consumption. And we are still at 22 veteran suicides a day. And the veteran community really is in need of this type of legislation to really kickstart this whole our turnaround from this. The impact on the veteran population has been mighty, evidenced by the numbers I just quoted. But the thing is that we are also involved with trying to get legislation through. Speaking up, I actually participated in the first ever cannabis education event on a military base in Hawaii last summer. And it was a 2-day event. We were able to speak directly with the Pacific Command commander of the Pacific for the VA, and actually took he actually took our concerns to the Secretary of the VA, and less than a year later, the VA medical research bill is going through. So there are some strides happening, and I would say the veteran community is a very powerful tool, a useful community if you know how to wield that tool, and a willing tool for the masses too. During my advocacy, the business itself revealed itself to me. And I realized that at a certain point that in order to get people moving, I would have to evolve to become that which I have been screaming about. And so in 2020, I partnered with my partner, professional football player, Mr. Eugene.
Lorianne, see her.
Okay. Did I mess up? Okay.
You're all good, Leo. Keep going.
Oh, okay. So in 2020, I partnered with former professional football player, Mr. Eugene Monroe, and we started a business called Collective 60. And so we decided that we would actually apply for a cultivation and manufacturing license here in the state of New Jersey. And I realized that evolution in of itself is a form of activism, if you think about it. We are not time appropriate as a community in our fundamental understanding of this plant or this industry. And what is required of us at this time is for us to think 4 or 5 generations down the road. And this is a critical time because we have to think about things that if they don't make sense then we need to think of those mechanisms that can be put in place so that they can make it make sense then. That's this now. We're in that period right now. And so to be a part of this continuous evolution and seeing how our current regulatory commission, along with Executive Director Jeff Brown and Director of Diversity and Inclusion, Mr. Wesley McWhite, to see how they have faced this Herculean effort, this Herculean and monumental task, and have gotten us to this point is phenomenal. And I think the future is bright in the state of New Jersey. One of the most infuriating things about this entire conversation for me is that 2% of the plant takes up 98% of the conversation. And so to be able to move forward in this way, it's just been an honor and a pleasure to be a part of. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to our host, And I'm here for any kind of questions. Please hit me with what you got. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo, for that wonderful history. So we're going to turn it over to question and answer. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can. So right now we're going to start with a question about cannabis revenue. So Ami had mentioned this in her presentation, but I'd like to hear from both of you. When you say cannabis revenue will go back to the communities, what does that mean? And can you give an example of what that money could be used for?
So the way it was broken down is a couple of things. So 70% of all revenue goes to impact zones. Those are cities like Newark, Trenton, Camden, Atlantic City. There's a particular population breakdown to who participates in that. And then 30% of the revenue goes to the police department to be able to fund the education of drug recognition experts, DREs. So these are the people that if you are suspected of, being under the influence of cannabis, then this person is supposed to come and see you, and they're supposed to look at you and tell if you're high or not and under the influence. So that's the way that works. But what we also have is a social equity excise tax. And that is on a rolling basis. It's on a sliding scale, basically. And it's capped at $65 an ounce. So depending on, if the price of if the market value of a price of a pound of weed goes down, the excise tax goes up and stops at $65, vice versa. And as more currently ounce of cannabis for retail price for an ounce of cannabis is between $400 and $450 an ounce, which is insane. And why you still have such a strong illicit market presence. But as more and more cultivators and dispensaries come online, you'll see that market price go down. But what will also happen is that excise tax goes up, and again stops at $65 an ounce. 100% of that money goes into the social equity program, and hence why the importance of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, because it is that office who actually oversees the creation of that program and the execution of it. Some of the benefit that you're going to see right now in the immediate is the example of the technical assistance program that's currently being run by the. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. You'll currently see some of the results being a technical assistance program currently being run by the New Jersey State's Business Action Center. And so that is just one of a number of products that are going to establish themselves. But again, we have not hit the 1 year mark of being a industry. We are very, very young. We are speaking, we are building very slowly, but the shoring up of the foundation of this industry is what's the cause for that. And then also, again, I cannot stress enough, this is just the 6th year of the recovery of 8 years of Chris Christie as an industry. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to get past in order to make these things happen. And it'll get better. New Jersey's projected to be a $2.5 billion year industry by 2025. So that's in less than 2 years. That's it.
Yeah, and just, to add, right now, the money hasn't actually been spent on anything yet because, as Leo has mentioned, we're really only in our first year of the industry being live in the state, but there are anticipated projections, right, of what they imagine the state will earn from this new revenue stream. And so when we talk about how this money should be used and what we've heard our partners, community level partners, grassroots organizations say they'd like to see this money for are really two things, right? So one, they say we want to see this money used to support services and resources that we just haven't seen in our communities, right? Like we've been asking for them forever, we've been demanding them forever, and the state hasn't funded them, our local municipalities haven't funded them. And so people want housing, they want education resources, they want healthcare, they want the basics, right? Like things that'll help people get access to um, employment or other opportunities. What they also say at the same time is, hey, we don't want you to spend this money, any more of this money on the criminal legal system. So this new money that comes in, don't spend it on the police, don't spend it on the courts, don't spend it on prisons, don't spend it on basically breaking our communities apart even further, because that's what you've done for over 50 years, and the harms are felt today, right, across generation. And so that's really what we think about when we think of these funds. As Leah mentioned, these are going back to specific communities in the state that are deemed to have been most harmed by criminalization. And so it's really important, right, that those voices in those communities have the chance to be heard and really listened to, that it's not just lip service to this idea of community reinvestment, but that it's meaningful and real. So just this is something that all of us should really keep an eye out for, because we want to make sure the promise actually translates into practice.
And it's also important to note that because of the way we legalize for adult use in New Jersey, again, through ballot referendum, our statute gave municipalities a very dangerous amount of power. And so a lot of out of the 560 something municipalities in the state of New Jersey, 400 of them opted out, despite the fact that cannabis got overwhelming support. Leadership in each of those counties decided to opt the state out, that their municipality out, until many of them cited they didn't know what the rules were going to be. Some of them just said they just didn't want it in their town at all. By doing so, it sort of kind of created a bit of an unofficial cap that was placed that prevented things from happening. The official cap to what is it, 28 cultivators, I think, that cap actually expires today. And so, but we still have to bring a lot of these towns online. The good news is that there is an office within the Cannabis Regulatory Commission whose specific purpose is to deal directly with municipalities who have questions or need just assistance in adopting their rules in which they would actually allow for business to operate within their jurisdiction.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And switching from a very local question into a much bigger national question, and we'll start with Ami this time. Do you think we'll ever see cannabis legalized on a federal level? And if so, what difference would it make, given that it's already legal in New Jersey?
Yeah, I think we will eventually see cannabis legalized at the federal level. There have been moves made in that space for the last few years. And I think that it's an issue that's increasingly bipartisan. And so what I will say is that I think it could come when we least expect it. What I will also say is that it matters how it happens, right? And so for people who are following this issue at the national level, there have been all sorts of bills over the years. Some of them are about making it easier for businesses to access money in this space, but really the businesses that push for it the most are the big corporations that are already multimillionaires. There's bills that are all about decriminalization. And so what I will say as someone who cares about this issue and really from a racial justice perspective, if and when national action happens, all of us should be pushing for something that's really centered in racial justice. We should be pushing for decriminalization. We should be pushing for provisions around repair, like expungement. We should be pushing for money that comes from this nationally to go back to communities. And we should make sure, right, that we're not moving backwards when it comes to marijuana legalization, but really learning as we go. If you look at some of the first states that legalized cannabis, they did it in ways that did not address issues of justice or equity. And those places like Colorado, like Washington, they find themselves a decade later going back and trying to fix. And it's a lot harder to fix something, right, that you've already kind of let go like a runaway train. And the states that have come later, we've tried to learn and fix those mistakes and make sure we're doing this in a better way. And so if this happens on the national level, we just have to make sure we're holding people's feet to the fire, that they're doing it the right way.
Mm. I will say this. Ami is 10,000,000% correct in everything that she is saying, that she has just said. So I'm not going to repeat that. What I'll do is I'll take it a step further and give people what to do next. And the what to do next is contact your US congressman and your US senator. Okay. Tell them that you want safe banking, you want federal legalization of cannabis. That is actually I know we talk about money and everything, but here's the thing. That is the currency that they respect and accept. Now, the reason why I'm telling you to call them wherever you are is because they have to do one of three things. They either have to send you a letter back, they either got to email you, or they got to call you back. It's the law. By law, that's what they have to do. So if 5,000 people just called U.S. Congressman Donald Payne and said, hey, I want safe banking or whatnot, that's 5,000 responses that his office is going to have to give. What do you think is going to happen? And so that is what we have to do, because what I'm starting to realize, and I tell this to people all the time who want to get in this industry, if you do not have a political calendar persuasion to your strategy, you are screwed. Okay, because again, to Ami's point, it is bipartisan. And I think that some party, be it Republican, Democrat, Independent, I don't know who, but somebody's going to use this to get a vote, because they're starting to realize and wake up that that cannabis vote is very, very real. Again, look at your local elections, look at your state elections, call each of your representatives, explain to them what you want to see, what you want to have happen. And again, they have to respond to those inquiries. So please, everything that Ami said is true. And now I just told you what to do next. Make some phone calls. And guess what, y'all? It's free.
It is. And as I feel strongly, your duty as a citizen as well. So you're
yes.
speaking our language, Leah. Wonderful.
Yes. Oh, please. This has been the single greatest civics lesson of my life. That Schoolhouse Rock video, A Bill is a Bill. Yeah, that needs to be remixed for real. It's not that easy.
Okay, Leah, we'll be in contact. We're going to do a remix of the School of Rock video.
All right.
Schoolhouse Rock video.
Stay tuned, y'all.
Yeah, there we go. All right. So we have just a couple more minutes left. And this is a little bit of a broader question. So Leo, we'll start with you and then go to Ami. What some people say, particularly those that aren't as familiar with cannabis, they express concerns about cannabis being a gateway drug. And what do you have to say to people who express that concern, particularly parents?
Okay, so the term gateway drug, okay, whenever I hear anyone in the industry hear someone use the term gateway drug, you just dated yourself, okay? That term was scientifically debunked years ago. So it's like you're already telling on yourself. It's someone who says gateway drug is like someone who still calls Black people colored. Like, ooh, what year are you? We already know. And so in fact, it's not even looked at as a gateway drug in some states. In some states, it's an exit drug. They're actually using medical cannabis to help folks wean off of the harder drugs like heroin and crack and all that stuff. So it has not been a gateway drug for years now. If this was a television show, if you're saying gateway drug, you're in season 1, episode 4. We're in season 12, episode 6. So I need you to binge watch. So here's the season 1 spoiler alert. it's not a gateway drug anymore.
And
That's what
maybe this webinar was seasons 1 through 6 catching you up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sorry, Avi, go ahead.
No, that was a really great way of putting it, Leo. I just want to say, I think that in this space, you hear the gateway drug myth all the time. The only thing that cannabis and marijuana has been a gateway to is to the criminal legal system for people, right? And what it has done is funnel thousands and thousands and thousands of Black and brown people into the criminal legal system for quite literally using a drug, a substance, right? And so I think that we need to take a step back and address where these misconceptions come from. What I will also say is that we need to think broadly about how we're talking about drugs generally across the board, right? So we started here with marijuana legalization and decriminalization. But what we know is that the war on drugs does not end just because we've legalized cannabis, right? And that there's much more work that we have to do. And so one thing we want to work on is decriminalizing all drugs in the state, because we know that at the end of the day, criminal penalties do more harm than good. And that if we care about this issue as a health issue, right, if we want people to get the access to the health and the harm reduction that they need, then we need to be investing in non-punitive solutions that are evidence-based and not in more of this tough on crime, war on drugs, fear mongering and stigma that is really coming out of the war on drugs. And so I, encourage people to look at the research. I think what research will tell you is that criminalization is incredibly unsuccessful, that there's interventions that can help to support people, and that if we're serious about kind of building strong communities, we need to reevaluate our approach to the system.
I also think that folks need to understand when we're having this kind of conversation, and I like to say this to people: we're going to have this conversation, and all of us going to have to get naked up in here, okay? And we're going to talk that talk, then let's talk that talk. Okay, let's break it down into numbers. Ami gave you some really good numbers which were true about the racial disparity. Okay, those numbers add up to $145 million lost by the prison industrial complex in the state of New Jersey. And so there was also a separate report here in the state of New Jersey on the use of force amongst police. And people of color made up over 80% of the use of force by police. So that tells you that the intentional targeting and tormenting people in communities of color is a thing here in New Jersey. And when you talk about cannabis legalization, you got to realize you're messing with 3 types of money. You're messing with old money. That's the pharmaceutical industry. They've been here for generations. You also messing with long money. That's the alcohol industry. They've been here for generations. And then you messing with big money, which is the prison industrial complex. So to get here over that long period of time wasn't by happenstance. It is in certain people's best interest for things to be just as they are. And a lot of those people, some of those people are still in our state house. So again, if we're going to have this conversation, then we have to at least agree that the time for oxymoronic politics, that's over. We are all recovering from COVID right now. And we are, and the world is in a state of chaos. So this particular type of utopia that folks have been trying to hold on to, historically, based off of these numbers, have been a disturbia for people in the same state. So we really need to stop playing with the games and let's get time appropriate, even in our terminology when we talk about this.
I like that. I like the image of 2 different states for 2 different people. I think that's a very powerful image. So we have time for one final question before we wrap up, from one of our friends in the chat from UFCW 360. And Jake's question is, what can the labor unions do to make sure that they're doing their part when it comes to social justice and social equity? So Ami, we'll start with you and then go to Leo.
Sure. Yeah. So, by law, these businesses all need to enter into labor peace agreements. And so there is a requirement that the industry itself is working with unions. What I will also say is that it's really important, as unions are thinking about this, to create avenues specifically for Black and brown people. I think the unions are incredibly important, but we also know that certain unions have leaned more towards have historically not always included all people. And so I think one part of this is making sure that as these sorts of business opportunities are created, as there's new employment opportunities, that they're accessible for everyone. I think the other part is really just pushing for strong provisions to support people, right? These are entirely new jobs that did not exist before the cannabis industry came into place. But we want to make sure they're good jobs, right? We want to make sure that people are being paid adequately, that they're getting the care that they need in terms of healthcare and other benefits. And I think unions play a big role in shaping what that will look like here in New Jersey. At the end of the day, this is an industry that is going to bring in billions to the state over time. There's a lot of people who are going to make a lot of money off of this industry. We have to make sure that employees aren't left behind.
I think that unions, unions, any organization, particularly unions and the state, they would be smart to absorb as many activists as they can. Stop trying to define it yourselves and get the people who actually know what to do. If you can absorb as many and engage with people such as myself and Ami on a regular basis, it will help to, again, remember, it'll take you from season 6 and bring you up to season 12. And that's particularly important, is particularly when we're talking about the union. I got to give it to Hugh Giordano, who's been awesome with his engagement representing the union as well. But the reason why this is important is, again, to gain that education for the union itself so that they can focus in on workforce development. See, we're not just talking about changing our view on, we're not just talking about having a cultural shift in how we view this plant, but we're also talking about facilitating a massive, massive transfer of wealth. And the logistics behind that almost can't be quantified. It's part of that 98% of the plant that no one's talking about, because we still stuck on this 2%. I mean, damn, Alex, you had a question about gateway drugs. That tells you right there. Like, we are not where we need to be. And the thing is that, you have to, for organizations like unions, they would be wise to engage with actual activists and folks who are actual subject matter experts, but particularly whose expertise comes from being real-time, boots on the ground activists and intel.
Well, I think that is the perfect ending. I think you folks have also highlighted another reason for environmental groups to care about social justice, especially around cannabis, because one of the things that we are pushing for over the next few years is equitable access to a lot of clean energy jobs. And I think one of the most important things is to make sure that something that is legal on a statewide basis is not a disqualifier for getting those good union jobs. So I think
that's why I had to shout out Hugh, because
exactly.
That's when I talked to Hugh Giordano, when he and I talk, that's exactly what we talk about. He's been doing that for years. And sometimes I feel like he's been by himself, but I can't say that the union, like UFCW, has been absent from the conversation. No, right, Ami? Because like I said, he's always there. So I know they know. It's just others like them don't know. They're slow with it.
And that's what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank both of you, Leo and Ami. You have both been fantastic panelists for your insight and for your advocacy, continuing advocacy on cannabis legalization here in New Jersey. As it turns out, we are at time. We encourage everyone on this webinar to follow Ami and Leo on their respective social medias, as well as I just found Leo's podcast as well that I'm excited about. So
yeah, we'll be dropping our first episode soon. So you guys, you'll like it. You'll like it.
There you go. So just a reminder, this is the very first webinar in LCB's social justice series. It's going to be a 6-part series. The next webinar is going to be in March, so keep an eye out for that announcement on New Jersey LCB's social media. Thank you again to all of our sponsors. The next webinar is going to be on criminal justice and police reform. So another great and related topic. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to LCV. And thank you to everyone for attending. Enjoy your evening, everyone, and have a good night.
Thanks.